The billionaire's private jet was supposed to be the quietest place in the sky, a luxurious sanctuary away from the world's troubles. The seats were upholstered in creamy leather, soft enough to sink into, the windows shaded by automatic dimmers, and the cabin filled with the faint hum of the engines. Everything about the journey from New York to Paris was meant to be perfection. But it wasn't. The moment the plane took off, the billionaire's baby began to cry. It wasn't the ordinary cry of a baby who was simply fussy. It was shrill, desperate, and relentless, echoing through the cabin like an alarm that refused to turn off. Flight attendants rushed up and down the aisle, offering warm milk, toys, and soothing words, but nothing worked. The billionaire, a man whose name was known in every financial magazine and whose face often appeared on the covers of business journals, looked completely helpless. His custom-tailored suit couldn't hide the anxiety etched across his face. He rocked his baby in his arms, whispered, pleaded, but the crying grew louder. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some pulled blankets over their heads, others sighed loudly in frustration, and a few muttered about refunds and ruined flights. This wasn't a regular flight. Though chartered privately by the billionaire, he had allowed select business partners, assistants, and a few other high-profile passengers on board. Everyone was used to comfort, silence, and efficiency. What they weren't used to was chaos. The longer the baby cried, the more irritated the passengers grew, and the more embarrassed the billionaire became. He was a man who built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and never once lost control in public. Yet here he was, utterly defeated by the small child in his arms. In the corner of the cabin sat a young girl, no more than 12 or 13. She was quiet, almost invisible, her small hands folded neatly on her lap. She wore simple clothes, nothing like the polished business attire of the adults around her. She wasn't anyone important, at least not to those who had noticed her at all. She had boarded with her mother, who now sat asleep against the window, exhausted from what seemed to be a long journey. The girl had been silent the entire time, watching the drama unfold without a single complaint. As the minutes stretched into an hour and the baby's cries showed no sign of stopping, the billionaire finally stood in the aisle, frustration breaking through his carefully constructed calm. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse, "does anyone know what to do? I'll give anything. Just help me calm him down." His words were desperate, uncharacteristic of a man who was always in control. But desperation has a way of humbling even the most powerful. For a moment, no one moved. People shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak up. They had advice, perhaps, but none wanted to step into the mess of responsibility. It was then that the quiet girl slowly stood. Her movements were hesitant but sure, her eyes fixed on the billionaire's baby, not on the billionaire himself. She walked to the aisle, and for the first time, every eye in the cabin turned to her. "May I try?" she asked softly. Her voice was gentle, almost like a whisper, but it cut through the noise. The billionaire blinked, stunned. This girl, so young, so small, offered what his staff of nannies and doctors hadn't been able to. Desperation outweighed doubt, and after a long pause, he nodded and placed the baby carefully into her arms. The crying continued for a moment, shrill and piercing, but the girl didn't flinch. She held the baby close, cradling him against her chest, and began to hum. It wasn't a tune anyone recognized. It wasn't a lullaby that could be traced to any culture or country. It was simply a sound, low and rhythmic, flowing like water, soft enough to calm even the most restless spirit. Her voice was steady, carrying a warmth that words couldn't capture. The change was immediate. The baby's cries faltered, then softened, then quieted altogether. Within minutes, the child who had been inconsolable was now breathing evenly, tiny eyelids fluttering shut in peaceful sleep. The cabin was silent again, but this time it wasn't filled with tension. It was filled with awe. The billionaire stared at his child, then at the girl, his expression unreadable. The passengers exchanged glances, whispers rippling through the cabin. Who was this girl? How had she done what no one else could? The girl didn't look at anyone. She simply rocked the baby gently for a while, then handed him back to the billionaire with the same quiet grace she had shown when she stepped forward. The billionaire took his son back, almost reluctant to break the connection. His hands, used to gripping million-dollar contracts and powerful handshakes, trembled slightly as he accepted the now sleeping child. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, rough with emotion. It wasn't the polished tone of a businessman. It was the voice of a father, stripped of all pride. How did you do that?" The girl shrugged softly. "I just listened. Babies don't always need things. Sometimes they just need someone to feel calm with." She said it simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Then she quietly returned to her seat, folded her hands again, and looked out the window. The rest of the flight passed in peace, but the silence was different now. Passengers didn't complain. They kept stealing glances at the quiet girl, their expressions filled with something between admiration and curiosity. Even the billionaire, who returned to his seat with his baby still asleep in his arms, found himself glancing at her again and again. When the plane finally landed in Paris, the billionaire made his way to the girl and her mother before anyone else could leave. He knelt slightly, so he wasn't towering over her, and spoke in a softer voice than anyone had ever heard from him. "You've given me something I can never repay, but I'd like to try." Tell me what you want. Anything." The girl looked at him, her eyes calm, steady, and far older than her years. "I don't need anything," she said. "Just be kind to your baby. He doesn't need you to be a billionaire. He just needs you to be his dad." For a moment, the billionaire didn't know how to respond. This girl, so young, had reminded him of something he had nearly forgotten: the difference between providing wealth and providing love. He lowered his gaze, humbled, and nodded. "I will," he promised, more to himself than to her. The passengers disembarked, still buzzing about the moment they had witnessed. By the next day, the story had already spread. A billionaire's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane until a quiet girl stood up. The world called it heartwarming, miraculous, even unbelievable. But for the billionaire, it was something deeper. It was the reminder that no matter how powerful, how wealthy, or how important he became, nothing mattered more than the small, fragile life he held in his arms. And somewhere in the background, the quiet girl and her mother walked into the crowd of the Paris airport, vanishing like shadows, leaving behind nothing but a memory, a story that would live on, told again and again by those who had been there. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from the loudest voices or the richest people. Sometimes they come from the quietest soul in the room, the one who listens, who feels, and who simply stands up when no one else will. And in that moment, at 30,000 feet in the sky, a billionaire learned how to be a father, all because a quiet girl found the courage to stand,